Good morning, St. Andrew family, and welcome to our Sunday morning online worship service. I'm Justin Bullis, and it is my privilege to welcome you here today from the St. Andrew Sanctuary. I am grateful, as always, to share this sacred online space with you, where we are all invited, included, and valued as vital and beloved members of our broader worshiping community. Please take a moment to visit gostandrew.com/sign-in to let us know that you're here and to share some information about yourself. We'd love to know from where or from when you're joining us, or if you have any prayer requests or questions about our church. If you would like to explore deeper engagement with the work God is doing in and through our community, you can email us directly at connect@gostandrew.com. We would love to hear from you. Also, be sure to check out the announcement slides at the beginning and end of this video to see some upcoming events and opportunities to get more involved in the St. Andrew community. You can also visit the events page on our website to see an updated events calendar. Lastly, if you would like to contribute a financial gift to the work and ministry of St. Andrew, you can visit gostandrew.com/give or text St. Andrew to 28950. As Reverend Mark reminds us every week, St. Andrew is an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that welcomes all people into the full life and communion of our church. This includes saints and sinners, believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe or even if you believe anything at all, you are welcome here and you belong here. And now let's listen together as Reverend Mark brings us the first message in our brand new sermon series on well-being, titled, How Are You Really? 4 Practices for Wholeness of Life.
They came to the other side of the lake, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any more, even with a chain, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains. But the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned in the lake. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighbourhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed.
So, how are you? It's the most common question in all the world. in every culture. Como esta, allez-vous, como va, what's poppin, what's buzzin' cousin, Wassabi, how are you? It's the most common question we're apt to hear, which invariably leads to the most half-hearted, disingenuous answers we're apt to give. Great, good, fine, okay, hanging in there, can't complain, living the dream, feeling like a pit bull in a butcher shop, you know. But how are you really? It's our question over the next 4 weeks for this new series, because how we answer that question is profoundly important to God. How are you really? One mistake Christians often make is assuming that Jesus was principally concerned with matters of belief or doctrine. For 2,000 years, Christians have been preoccupied with spiritual and supernatural concerns, salvation and damnation, heaven and hell, miracles and angels. But too often, Christians neglect the earthly and physical concerns of life, like flesh and blood, mind and body, mental and emotional well-being. And sadly, Christians easily forget that Jesus cared so much about our minds and our bodies that there are actually 26 recorded accounts in the Gospels of Jesus physically healing people. For Jesus, body, mind, and spirit could not be separated. He said, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. But somehow we've confused abundant life with eternal life, as if this earthly life is less important than eternal life, as if bodies are less important than souls, as if bodies can even be separated from souls. But Jesus had a different view of what it means to be human. For Jesus, there are no bodies and souls. There are only ensouled bodies and embodied souls. And Jesus knew what behavioral scientists have proven over the last few decades, that there's an inseparable reciprocal relationship between our bodies and our minds. And the word for this is, of course, psychosomatic. It's from the Greek psyche, meaning mind or soul, and somatikos, meaning body. And psychosomatic explains the ways our bodies tell us how we're doing, how our minds and our souls are doing. It reminds us that spirit and matter, soul and flesh, mind and body are wonderfully entangled. When our spirit aches or suffers trauma, it uses material form, that is, our physical body, to tell us. Addiction, bulimia, obesity, cutting, overwork, insomnia, hypertension. Whenever there is ache or emptiness of spirit, our bodies tell the truth. And likewise, whenever our body suffers trauma or exhaustion or ache, our spirits cry out, call out, cry out, shout out to us through depression, anxiety, restlessness, anger, fear, worry, suspicion, hopelessness. How are you really? Listen to your body and listen to your soul. What does it mean to say we are well? I want to talk today about wellness of mind. Mental health, and especially mental illness, is a subject Christians have historically avoided. Many Christians tragically associate mental illness with spiritual illness, or lack of faith, or even divine punishment. The assumption is that if you just pray harder or believe more, you could pull yourself out of this. This causes a lot of trauma and shame and stigma. So simply mentioning mental illness in a place like a church can be triggering. But we have to talk about it because it affects so many of us and those that we love. And because as our students return to school, this conversation is even more urgent than ever. The statistics suggest that mental illness impacts all of us, at least in some way. 1 in 4 adults in the world will experience a mental health issue at least once in their lifetime. 1 in 5 adults experience mental illness each year. That's 47 million people in the U.S. 1 in 25 adults in the U.S. experience serious mental illness each year. 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year, and about 4, this is the most important, about 4 out of 5 of those who seek treatment for mental illness actually get better. What do we mean by mental illness? Well, it manifests in so many ways that it's hard sometimes to be, clearly defined about it. Words like bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, addiction, anorexia and bulimia, multiple personality disorder. These are just some of the terms that brain science and psychology use to name the conditions that affect how the brain functions, which then affects the way the mind operates, which then affects the way a person behaves. So a mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, or feeling, mood, or behavior. The most prevalent are anxiety disorders, about 19%, major depressive episodes, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder. 19.3% of the U.S. adults with mental illness also have substance abuse disorder. With any mental illness, what we consider to be normal functioning in daily life and healthy ways of relating to self and others, it's all hindered or blocked by a condition that diminishes a person's capacity to live abundantly. So people with depression, for example, might struggle to just get out of bed or accomplish simple tasks. And people with anorexia might deprive their body of essential nutrition. People, for example, with PTSD might be unable to breathe when a particular event triggers stress. In each case, the mind trips into a self-destructive response because of a brain disorder. And what makes it all so hard to talk about is the stigma associated with mental illness. Tell somebody that you have diabetes and they'll likely respond with compassion and sympathy. But tell someone that you have depression or bipolar, and they may distance themselves in fear or judgment. So those with mental illness often feel ostracized, shamed, and cut off from the world, like this man that we read this morning from Mark's Gospel. This man lives in a cemetery, literally the land of the dead. He is dead to the world. Each night, people in town can hear him shrieking among the tombs. Sometimes they'll capture him, bind his wrists and ankles in chains, and haul his naked, shackled body back into town. But he always escapes, every time. Trailing broken chains behind him, he wanders the fields, tearing at his skin until it bleeds, trading one kind of pain for another. If he has a name, nobody knows it. If he has a past, no one remembers it. If he has a soul worth saving behind the darkness in his eyes, no one seems to see it. No one even looks until Jesus looks. All right, look, this story is strange to modern readers. It's full of bizarre details like talking demons, public nakedness, pigs, and healing. It's all pretty weird, especially the part about the demons. What do we make of this biblical talk about demons or evil spirits? Well, maybe in biblical times they had the same problems that we have today, but didn't have names for disorders like epilepsy or schizophrenia. And so they just called it demon possession. Or maybe demon possession really was a major problem back then, but like smallpox, it's just not a thing we have to worry about anymore. Or maybe there really is such a thing as demon possession in our world, but we just use medical or scientific terms to describe the things that seem to possess us. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that many suffer from addictions and from compulsions, from conditions that have overtaken their lives, making them do things and think in ways they don't want to do or think, things that hurt themselves or others, or bind them in chains, or cut them off from the world. You can call it whatever you'd like. But the demon always grows more powerful and controlling when we refuse to talk about it. Jesus came to set captives free, even this captive in the gospel, who is as good as dead. Everyone said, nothing can be done for this man. But watch what Jesus does for him in this story. Because he gives us insight that may help us, whether we suffer from a mental illness or love someone who does. Jesus asks the man, "What's your name?" And it's such a simple question, but it is essential to the man's healing. What's your name? This man has lost everything: his sanity, his dignity, his family, his home, his community. But worst of all, he's lost his humanity. He lives among tombs, shackled like an animal, naked, isolated, cut off from human community. He howls like a beast. He hurts himself. Worse than his illness is the shame he's endured, which has made him less than human. So Jesus asks him, "What's your name?" Because to have a name is to be human. To know a person's name, according to the ancients, was to know a person's essence, to know the person as a person. What's your name? The man has forgotten that he's a person. He knows himself only by the name of that which possesses him, which is, as he says, legion. A legion was the basic unit of the Roman army. It consisted of something like 6,000 soldiers. And so he says, "My name is Legion, because within me is a terrible, violent battle, a great struggle." And that battle defines how this man lives and how he understands himself, his identity. People who suffer from mental illness often struggle to differentiate what they have from who they are. And so they might say, "I'm depressed," rather than "I have depression." Or "I'm bipolar," rather than "I have bipolar." There's a reminder here that our illness is not our identity. Depression, anxiety, these are not who you are, they're what you have. Who you are is God's beloved. What you have is a condition. Your illness is not your essence. You are not your illness. Instead, maybe it's helpful to think of your illness as a character in the story that is you. I've always appreciated how Nadia Bolz-Weber speaks of her own experience with depression. She came to see her depression as a character in her life, and she named her depression Frances. And Frances, she says, first came to visit her in her teens and early 20s. She said Frances was a terrible roommate. She always told Nadia really devastating things about herself until her life fell apart and people worried about her. And one day, Nadia's mother realized that Frances, the roommate, was a major problem and suggested that maybe Nadia should go talk to someone about evicting her. Frances, she says, was a bit of a dope fiend, but it turned out there was one drug she didn't like. It's called Wellbutrin. And she said 2 weeks after taking Wellbutrin, she started seeing that Frances was gone. Not for good, she said. She says even today, it still seems like she knows how to find me, and sometimes she'll just show up unannounced and stay for a couple days, even though I'm now into so many things that she hates, like sobriety and exercise and community and eating well. And of course, she says, Jesus. It's brilliant, isn't it? Your illness is just a character in your story. And you can choose how you want to relate to that character. What's your name? asked Jesus. Legion, says the man. But it turns out Legion is just the character that Jesus has come to evict. And it's the power of Jesus' compassion that sees through the illness to the soul of this man that ultimately leads to his healing. There's something else that Jesus does in this story that makes all the difference. Jesus says the hard, courageous word. These demons, they beg Jesus not to destroy them. They plead for kindness. Go easy on us, they say. Cast us into the herd of pigs rather than into the bottomless pit. But Jesus, instead, orders the demons to leave the man and enter the pigs, which, of course, immediately stampede over the cliff and into the lake. I know that's a bizarre detail, but don't let the flying pigs distract you from the real point. Jesus refuses to go easy on the man. Jesus doesn't feel sorry for him. Jesus meets him where he is, but refuses to let him stay there, even if it means challenging him. Whether you suffer from mental illness or you live in love with someone who does, remember that what can make all the difference in the world is the dogged encouragement of others. William Styron, the late Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist of Sophie's Choice, wrote a wonderful memoir of his experience with depression years ago. It's entitled Darkness Visible. And in the book, he says it's vital that those suffering with depression be told, even convinced by someone, that they will pull through. He says the most important part of recovery is having someone tell you to get up, to breathe, to walk out of the valley. He says it's been shown over and over that if encouragement is dogged enough, the endangered one can nearly always be saved. It's so counterintuitive to push someone when they're in pain, but it does save lives. And Jesus says, as he often says, get up. It's tough love, life-saving love. Jesus does one last thing that makes all the difference. He restores this man to his community. Once healed, this man wants to go follow Jesus, but Jesus knows what the man really needs more than anything, and that is relationships and community. This man's been completely isolated, all alone in his pain. Every demon thrives in isolation. Depression, addiction, mania, anxiety. Loneliness is the go-to tactic of every demon. And the way to defeat the demon is to reconnect. Healing is never complete apart from community. Now, maybe you're asking the question, look, I don't have a mental illness, and so what does this have to do with me? But psychologists remind us of the emotional and mental impact that the pandemic has had on us. And they've identified this condition that they've come to call languishing. Languishing is the overlooked stepchild of mental health. Languishing lives in that void between depression and flourishing. It's the absence of well-being. It's a sense of stagnation and emptiness. It's captured in that simple phrase, meh. If you're languishing, it might feel like you're just muddling through your days, looking at life, the world, through a foggy windshield. Languishing dulls your motivation. It disrupts your ability to focus. And we know that it's the number one risk factor for developing mental illness later. People most likely to experience depression and anxiety in the next 10 years aren't the ones with those symptoms today. They're the people who are languishing right now. And this is why we're talking about mind-mending today. So can I give you just 4 quick, simple practices for mind-mending? These aren't earth-shattering. They're not even specifically Christian. Anyone can do them. The first is get some sleep. I know, it's simple. The 3 pillars of mental health are sleep, exercise, and diet. But the most important, it turns out, is sleep. Our brain needs at least 7 hours of sleep to rest and recover, to purge itself of unhealthy toxins and cortisol, to convert short-term memory to long-term memory. The strongest predictor of mental well-being is sleep quality. Second, get some exercise. Exercising 4 to 5 times a week for 20 to 30 minutes is proven to ease depression and anxiety by releasing endorphins and other natural brain chemicals that enhance your sense of well-being. Exercise takes your mind off worries. It breaks the cycle of negative thoughts that feed depression and anxiety. Our brains need routines. Why? Because routines give our lives some predictability. And predictability means our brains don't have to make decisions all the time. Our brains, they need to punch the clock and take some time off like we all do. And exercises routines, they give us a chance to take a breather. They give our brains a break. Number 3, get some food. It turns out our brains are greedy little organs. They make up only 2% of our total body weight, but they consume 20% of our daily calorie intake. We really are what we eat. Food really does go straight to our head. So if you don't remember anything at all, just stick with the so-called mood foods: vegetables, seafood, fresh herbs, garlic, olive oil, and grains. And finally, get some friends. You might have hundreds of friends on Facebook. Congratulations. Only they're not all your friends. Some of them actually are just trolling you. Jesus shows us in this story today that friends and family and community are essential to our well-being. And studies show that we need 3 to 5 close friends in our lives to feel fulfilled. Who are they for you? Who are the people you can't live without? Find them and invest in them. Our takeaways for today. God desires that we have life and have it abundantly. God gives us power and agency to make ourselves well. Get some sleep, get some exercise, get some food, get some friends.
My eyes up to the hills, this my morning song, where my strength comes from. I lift my eyes up to the hills, and this my evening song, where my help comes from. This is the gravity of love. Just as the moon follows the sun, you're all around me. You're holding everything. This is the hope of every land. Just as the universe expands, your love is reaching. You're holding everything.
In St. Andrew Kids, we create spaces that are welcoming and engaging, so when kids show up, they know they belong. 7 years ago, we transformed our hallways into a Colorado mountain experience with trees, lakes and rivers, forest animals, and lots of kids playing. But we weren't finished. This spring, we had the opportunity to expand this Colorado mountain theme to a room that needed a kid-approved transformation.
Preschool received 2 grants, the Child Care Operations Stabilization Grant and the Workforce Sustainability Grant, which allows us to improve areas of the preschool and invest in the staff. One of the projects we focused on is improving the look of what was formerly known as B120 and 122. We use the classroom daily for preschools, before and after care program, and in our indoor play space. In addition, the Children's Ministry uses this space regularly for evening or weekend programming. We wanted to create a more cohesive look in the youth area.
With the grant funds that Laura secured, we rehired the artist who creates and installs these amazing designs. St. Andrew volunteers of all ages also pitched in their time and skills to make it our own and help bring it to completion. In June, we unveiled Base Camp, and kids loved it.
Returning staff and potential families touring the program have commented on how wonderful the room looks and how nicely it ties to the preschool walls. It's also been so fun to see the children's faces and their reactions to the walls as they return to school.
We recognize the importance of showing little ones and their families that they are warmly welcomed in Sunday worship too. So in addition to Base Camp, the artist transformed the family room in the sanctuary into a bunny-filled vegetable garden. Now families with little ones have a comfortable space that invites wonder and movement during worship services. We're so grateful that children are not only welcome at St. Andrew, but that they are loved and embraced. Thank you for enfolding them into our faith community.
And now, as you return to the rhythms and routines of your busy lives this week, I leave you with this benediction, a prayer from Reverend Carla, posted on their website, revgalblogpals.org. Holy Risen One, signs of your resurrection surprise us with their ordinary sacred. We go about our lives not knowing how to live into the new life you promise, so we do what we know to do. As the disciples go back to fishing, we get back to business. All the while in the back of our minds and hearts, we grieve your absence. We miss your presence. And just as we start to think you were just a dream, you show up as ordinary sacred, grilling fish on the beach, offering a small kindness through a stranger on the street, a simple magic moment with a friend, a tulip blooming in the rain. Help us to remember that everything is different in the living of our lives because of you. As we celebrate new life, we are mindful of the places and people and creatures who suffer in mind, body, and spirit. We are mindful of war-torn countries and refugee children who pick scraps of bread off the street to eat. We are mindful for those who deal with the stress of caring for a loved one and those whose bodies are racked with sickness and disease. We pause here to remember them. Like Paul, make the scales fall from our heart's eyes so that we can see your world in the way you see it. Clear our vision so that we can love with the love you so freely offer us. In the name of Christ, our sibling and friend. Amen.